Jackson Reeves never expected to find an unconscious woman in fine silk lying beside the railroad tracks, her elegant carpet bag clutched in death-white fingers. The moment he touched the silver locket hidden inside, memories of his brother's battlefield death crashed through him like a runaway train, leaving him with the gut-wrenching certainty that this mysterious woman was now bound to his fate. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The setting sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape as Jackson Reeves rode along the newly laid railroad tracks. His horse's hooves crunched rhythmically against the gravel, the only sound for miles, save for the occasional cry of a distant hawk. The jagged scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth pulled tighter in the cooling air, a permanent reminder of the war that had taken more than just his smooth skin. It had taken everything. 5 years since Gettysburg, and still the nightmares came. 5 years since he'd watched his brother fall, bullet-riddled and gasping. 5 years of wandering, taking odd jobs as a ranch hand, a bounty hunter, anything that kept him moving, kept him from settling, kept him from remembering. The railroad had been his latest employer, protecting the workers from bandits and native raids as they pushed ever westward, conquering the wilderness with iron and steam. His contract had ended yesterday at Fort Wilcox, but Jackson had no destination in mind, no home called to him, no family waited with open arms. So he rode alongside the tracks, letting them guide him west, always west, toward the setting sun and the promise of something new, something that might finally quiet the ghosts that haunted him. The first sign that something was amiss came when his mare, Sadie, suddenly tensed beneath him. Her ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as she snorted in alarm. Jackson's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, eyes scanning the rocky terrain. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks ablaze with the dying light of day, but nothing moved among the scrub brush and cacti. "What is it, girl?" he murmured, patting Sadie's neck. "You see something I don't." The horse snorted again and sidestepped nervously. Jackson followed her gaze, and that's when he saw it. A splash of blue fabric against the dull brown landscape just off the tracks about 50 yards ahead. He squinted, trying to make sense of the sight. It wasn't moving, whatever it was. "Easy now," he whispered, nudging Sadie forward with his knees, his hand still resting on his pistol. As they drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made Jackson's breath catch in his throat. A woman. She lay crumpled beside the tracks, her fine blue traveling dress spread around her like a pool of water. A small carpet bag rested near her outstretched hand, its ornate pattern incongruous against the harsh desert backdrop. Jackson dismounted quickly, approached cautious. He'd seen ambushes set with bait before. His eyes swept the ridgeline again, searching for the glint of a rifle barrel or the shadow of a waiting assailant. But there was only silence and the steady whisper of the wind. "Ma'am," he called out, keeping his distance. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. The woman didn't stir. Taking a deep breath, Jackson closed the distance between them, kneeling beside her still form. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with delicate features and pale skin now flushed with sunburn. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around her face. Her clothing spoke of wealth: fine blue silk, lace at the collar and cuffs, boots of soft leather, not the typical attire of frontier women. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. Relief washed over him. At least she was alive. "Ma'am?" he tried again, gently shaking her shoulder. "Can you wake up? Are you hurt?" Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Her lips moved, cracked and dry, but no sound emerged. Jackson looked around. The nearest town was Harper's Crossing, at least a day's ride back east. Fort Wilcox was closer, perhaps 8 hours if he pushed Sadie hard. But the woman needed water and shelter now. The desert nights were merciless, dropping to near freezing after the scorching days. He remembered a line shack about 2 miles west, a simple shelter for railroad workers during storms. It wasn't much, but it had a roof and walls. It would have to do. Carefully, he slipped one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, lifting her as gently as possible. She was lighter than he expected, alarmingly so. How long had she been out here? He settled her against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached down and grabbed the carpet bag. Something solid shifted inside, the weight of it surprising him. With the woman secured in his arms, Jackson whistled for Sadie. The mare approached cautiously, eyeing the unconscious woman with suspicion. "It's all right, girl," he soothed. "She needs our help." Getting her up on the saddle was awkward, but Jackson managed, climbing up behind her and cradling her against his chest to keep her from falling. The carpet bag he tied to the saddle horn. With a click of his tongue, he urged Sadie forward, keeping to a gentle walk to avoid jostling his delicate cargo. As they rode, questions tumbled through his mind. Who was she? How had she ended up alone by the tracks? The last train through had been 2 days ago, according to the schedule. Had she been out here that long, beneath the merciless sun? It was a miracle she was still alive, if that was the case. Her head rested against his chest, her breathing shallow but regular. Up close, he could see that beneath the sunburn and dust, she was beautiful in a refined Eastern way. Her hands were soft, uncalloused, the hands of someone who had never known hard labor. A lady through and through. "Don't you worry," he found himself whispering, though he knew she couldn't hear. "I'll get you somewhere safe." The line shack appeared just as the last light was fading from the sky. A simple structure of rough-hewn logs with a slanted roof. It wasn't much to look at, but to Jackson, it might as well have been a palace. He dismounted carefully, balancing the woman in his arms, and carried her to the door. It took some maneuvering to get it open while holding her, but he managed. Inside was sparse but serviceable. A small iron stove, a rough table with a single chair, a narrow cot against the far wall, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. The railroad company kept these shacks provisioned for emergencies. Jackson laid the woman gently on the cot, then hurried back outside to retrieve Sadie's saddlebags and the mysterious carpet bag. Once Sadie was unsaddled and tethered to the small lean-to beside the shack with access to the water trough, Jackson returned inside. He lit the lantern hanging from a hook in the ceiling, its warm glow chasing away the gathering darkness. Then he set about making the woman comfortable, removing her boots and covering her with the rough wool blanket from his bedroll. Next, he pumped water from the small hand pump in the corner. Thankfully, the railroad had dug a well here and soaked his bandana. Gently, he wiped the dust from her face and pressed the cool cloth to her forehead. Her skin was hot to the touch. She had a fever. "Come on now," he murmured. "You need to drink something." He lifted her head slightly, pressing his canteen to her lips. Most of the water ran down her chin, but she swallowed reflexively a few times. It was better than nothing. With the woman as comfortable as he could make her, Jackson finally turned his attention to the carpet bag. It sat on the table where he'd placed it, elegant and out of place in the rustic shack. The pattern was intricate, vines and flowers woven in gold thread against deep burgundy velvet. The clasp was brass, shaped like two intertwined serpents. He hesitated, fingers hovering over it. It felt wrong to pry into her belongings without permission, but what if there was something inside that could tell him who she was, or perhaps medicine she needed? With these justifications in mind, he carefully opened the clasp. The contents were not what he expected. On top lay a folded letter, the paper fine and heavy, sealed with red wax bearing a crest he didn't recognize. Beneath it was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with elegant handwriting. And there, nestled in the bottom of the bag, wrapped in velvet cloth, was something that made Jackson's heart stutter in his chest. A gleaming silver locket, ornately engraved, with a familiar insignia that he had never expected to see again. The same insignia that had been stamped on his brother's possessions when they'd been returned to him after Gettysburg. Jackson's fingers trembled as he lifted the locket from its velvet nest. The Reeves family crest, a falcon perched atop a shield with 3 stars, stared back at him, its silver surface catching the lantern light. It was impossible. This locket belonged to a world he'd left behind, a life that had ended in blood and cannon fire on a Pennsylvania battlefield. He clicked it open, heart hammering against his ribs. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, his mother, and opposite her, a portrait of his father in his Union Army colonel's uniform, stern and proud. The very same locket that had been stolen from his brother Matthew's body by Confederate looters after Gettysburg. A soft moan from the cot pulled him from his shock. The woman was stirring, her eyelids fluttering. Jackson quickly rewrapped the locket and placed it back in the carpet bag, closing it with unsteady hands. Questions could wait. The woman needed care first. He moved to her side, refreshing the damp cloth on her forehead. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe." Her eyes opened fully this time, startlingly blue, like cornflowers in summer. For a moment, they were unfocused. Dazed, then panic set in. She gasped, trying to sit up, her gaze darting wildly around the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where?" Her voice cracked, dry as desert sand. "Here," Jackson offered his canteen. Small sips. She recoiled from him at first, pressing herself against the wall, eyes wide with fear. Jackson didn't blame her. With his scarred face, trail-worn clothes, and several days' worth of beard, he knew he looked more outlaw than savior. "I found you by the railroad tracks, Mom," he explained, keeping his distance, voice gentle. "You were unconscious. I brought you here. It's a railroad line shack. You're safe, I promise. Just trying to help." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her. She studied his face, lingering on the scar, but not with disgust. More like assessment, then cautiously took the canteen from his outstretched hand. Her fingers brushed against his, soft and cool despite her fever. "Thank you," she whispered, after taking several small sips. Her voice had a refined Eastern accent, confirming his suspicions about her origins. "My name's Jackson Reeves, ma'am, former cavalryman with the Union Army, now working for the railroad, or was until yesterday." A flicker of something, recognition, concern, crossed her face at his name, but it was gone so quickly he thought he might have imagined it. "Elizabeth," she offered after a moment's hesitation. "Elizabeth Caldwell." The name meant nothing to Jackson, but he nodded politely. "Miss Caldwell, can you tell me what happened? How you came to be alone by the tracks?" Elizabeth's hand went instinctively to her throat, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. Her eyes darted to the table where her carpet bag sat. "My things!" "All there," Jackson assured her. "I brought your bag. Didn't look through it," he lied, guilt prickling at his conscience. "Just wanted to see if there was anything to identify you in case you didn't wake up." She seemed to accept this, relaxing slightly. "The train," she began, her voice stronger now. "I was traveling west from Boston to San Francisco." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "There were men. They came into my compartment during the night. They were looking for something." "Bandits?" Jackson asked, though typical bandits targeted the mail car or strongbox, not passenger compartments. Elizabeth shook her head weakly. "No, they were more deliberate. They knew what they wanted." Her hand went to her throat again. One of them was an older gentleman. Distinguished-looking, gray hair, fine clothes. He called me by name." Jackson frowned. This was no random robbery. "What did they take?" "Nothing," she said, surprising him. "I had hidden what they were looking for." She glanced at her bag again. "But they threatened me, said they would return. So when the train stopped at a water tower, I slipped away. I thought I could walk to the next station, but..." She gestured helplessly. "And I underestimated the distance, the heat." It was a plausible story, but Jackson sensed she was leaving parts out. Still, he didn't press. She was still weak, feverish. "You should rest," he said, standing. "I'll make some coffee, and there's jerky and hardtack. Not exactly fine dining, but it'll keep your strength up." Elizabeth nodded gratefully, settling back against the thin pillow. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on her carpet bag. Whatever secret it contained, it clearly weighed on her mind. As Jackson busied himself at the small stove, his thoughts turned to the locket. How had this Boston lady come to possess his family heirloom? The locket had been passed down through generations of Reeves men, given to their brides on wedding days. His father had given it to his mother, and she had passed it to Matthew before he went to war, a talisman of protection that had ultimately failed. The coffee began to boil, its rich aroma filling the small shack. Jackson poured a cup for Elizabeth and brought it to her, along with a small piece of jerky. "Thank you," she said, taking the tin cup carefully. She sipped the strong brew without complaint, though he doubted it was up to Boston standard. "Miss Caldwell," Jackson began, choosing his words carefully. I hope you don't mind my asking, but what takes you to San Francisco alone? It's unusual for a lady such as yourself to travel without companion or escort. Elizabeth's gaze dropped to her cup. My father died 3 months ago, she said softly. I have an uncle in San Francisco. He's my only remaining family. I'm sorry for your loss, Jackson said sincerely. Losing family is hard. You speak from experience, she observed, looking at him with those penetrating blue eyes. Jackson nodded, the familiar ache in his chest tightening. War took my brother. Illness took my parents soon after. Grief can kill as surely as any bullet. Elizabeth's expression softened. Yes, it can. She hesitated, then asked, Your scar, was that from the war as well? Most people avoided mentioning his disfigurement outright. Her directness was refreshing. Antietam, he answered. Confederate saber. I was lucky. The surgeon who stitched me up knew his business. Ugly, but I kept the eye. It's not ugly, she said with unexpected firmness. It's a mark of courage. Jackson didn't know how to respond to that, so he busied himself with his own coffee, uncomfortable with her assessment. He'd never considered his scar a badge of honor, only a daily reminder of all he'd lost. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the shack's wooden walls. The desert nights grew cold quickly, and this one promised to be bitter. Jackson added more wood to the stove, building up the fire. We should stay here tomorrow, he said, watching the flames grow. You need to regain your strength before we travel. Harper's Crossing is a day's ride east. They have a doctor there. No, Elizabeth said quickly, alarm evident in her voice. No towns, please? Jackson raised an eyebrow. Those men who were after you, you think they'll be looking in the towns along the railroad? She nodded, her fingers worrying at the blanket's edge. They won't give up easily. What they seek is valuable and dangerous in the wrong hands. Jackson's thoughts went immediately to the locket. What could be so valuable about a family heirloom? Unless there was something else in that carpet bag he hadn't discovered. Then where would you have us go? He asked. We can't stay in this line shack forever. Supplies won't last. Elizabeth hesitated, then met his gaze with unexpected determination. West, she said firmly. We continue west. My uncle will protect me when we reach San Francisco. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, considering he had no obligation to this woman beyond basic human decency. He'd done his part, rescued her, given her shelter and sustenance. Come morning, he could point her in the right direction and go his own way. But the locket in her bag tugged at him like an invisible thread. It was his family's legacy, perhaps the last connection to his brother. And if she was in genuine danger, I'll think on it, he said finally. For now, you should sleep. Morning comes early out here. Elizabeth nodded, her eyelids already growing heavy as exhaustion overtook her again. Thank you, Mr. Reeves, she murmured. You're a good man. Jackson turned away, uncomfortable with the assessment. A good man wouldn't be thinking of going through her belongings again while she slept. A good man wouldn't be contemplating stealing back what he believed was rightfully his. But as Elizabeth's breathing deepened into sleep, Jackson found himself staring at the carpet bag, his brother's dying face flashing before his eyes. Some ghosts couldn't be outrun, no matter how far west you traveled. Sleep eluded Jackson that night. He sat in the rickety chair by the stove, listening to the desert winds howl outside and Elizabeth's soft breathing from the cot. The locket beckoned to him like a siren's call. Family honor demanded he reclaim it. It belonged with the Reeves name, not in the possession of a stranger with secrets. But another part of him, the part that still believed in the gentleman's code his father had instilled, couldn't bring himself to rifle through a lady's belongings while she slept. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light creeping through the single small window. Jackson had dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, his hand never far from his Colt. Elizabeth stirred as the first rays touched her face. Her fever had broken during the night. Her cheeks were no longer flushed, though she remained pale. Morning, Jackson said, pushing himself up from the chair. His back protested the night spent upright. How are you feeling? Better, Elizabeth replied, her voice stronger than the previous evening. She sat up slowly, smoothing her rumpled dress with dignity that seemed out of place in the humble surrounding. Thanks to your care. Jackson busied himself rekindling the fire in the stove, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Coffee'll be ready soon, and I've still got some hardtack. Elizabeth swung her legs over the edge of the cot, testing her strength. "Mr. Reeves," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about your kindness. You've saved my life, yet you know nothing about me. Folks out here help each other," Jackson replied gruffly. "It's how we survive. Nevertheless, I'm in your debt." She stood, wavering slightly but remaining upright. "And I've put you in danger merely by association. Those men who were pursuing me, they're not the type to give up easily." Jackson poured water into the coffee pot, considering his words carefully. "These men, who are they exactly? Might help to know what we're up against if I'm escorting you west." Elizabeth moved to the small window, gazing out at the barren landscape now bathed in morning light. "My father was Josiah Caldwell," she said, as if the name should mean something to him. Jackson shrugged. "Sorry, miss, that name doesn't ring any bells. He was an antiquarian and collector in Boston, specialized in historical artifacts with unique properties." She turned to face him. "Some people believed he possessed items of great power, mystical power." Jackson nearly laughed, but stopped himself when he saw the seriousness in her expression. "You're talking about superstition, magic." "I'm talking about objects that have shaped history," she countered. "Items that men have killed for throughout the centuries." The coffee began to boil, and Jackson removed it from the heat, pouring 2 cups. He handed one to Elizabeth, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. "And you're carrying such an item?" he asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Elizabeth sipped her coffee, regarding him over the rim of her cup. "Several," she admitted. "My father's collection was vast. When he died, men started coming, collectors, scholars, opportunists. They wanted to buy pieces of the collection, but I refused to sell. Then the threats began." "So you fled west?" Jackson supplied. "To my uncle? Yes. He was my father's partner in his early days of collecting. He'll know how to protect the artifacts." She hesitated. "One artifact in particular?" Jackson's thoughts went immediately to the locket, but he kept his expression neutral. "And these men on the train, they're after this particular artifact?" "Yes. They're agents of a man named Augustus Blackwood. He's obsessed with my father's collection. Believes certain pieces belong to him by right." The name meant nothing to Jackson, but the intensity in Elizabeth's voice told him this Blackwood was a force to be reckoned with. "And do they," he asked, "belong to him, I mean?" Elizabeth's eyes flashed. "No, everything in that bag was rightfully my father's, acquired through legitimate means." Jackson wasn't sure he believed her, but he let it pass. "Well, if we're heading west, we should get moving. Daylight's burning, and we've got hard country ahead." Elizabeth glanced at her fine dress and impractical boots. "I'm afraid I'm not properly attired for a journey through the wilderness." Jackson rummaged through his saddlebags and pulled out a spare shirt and bandana. "These might help. Not exactly ladies' fashion, but they'll keep the sun off better than what you've got." Elizabeth accepted the clothes without complaint. "I'll need a moment to change." Jackson nodded and stepped outside to give her privacy. He checked on Sadie, who nickered softly at his approach. The mare seemed rested despite the meager accommodations. "We're heading west, girl," he told her, stroking her neck. "Oh, seems we've got ourselves entangled in a lady's troubles." 5 minutes later, Elizabeth emerged from the shack. She'd donned Jackson's shirt over her dress, using it like a duster. The sleeves were rolled up several times, and she'd used the bandana to tie back her hair. The transformation was striking, from proper Boston lady to something approaching a frontierswoman. The carpet bag remained clutched firmly in her hand. "Will this suffice?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Jackson nodded, oddly affected by the sight of her in his clothing. "It'll do," he managed. "Let's get moving." They set out with the sun still low in the eastern sky, Elizabeth riding behind Jackson on Sadie. The arrangement was improper by Eastern standards, but necessity overruled propriety in the desert. Elizabeth held onto Jackson's waist lightly, maintaining as much distance as the saddle would allow. The carpet bag was secured in front of them, within her constant sight. As they rode, following the railroad tracks westward, Jackson wrestled with how to broach the subject of the locket. Direct confrontation seemed unwise. She might deny everything or, worse, think him a thief himself. Yet the weight of the unanswered question hung heavy between them. "Your father," he began after they'd ridden for an hour. "How did he acquire his collection?" Elizabeth was silent for a moment, perhaps weighing how much to reveal. "He traveled extensively," she finally replied. "Europe, Africa, the Orient. After the war, he focused on American artifacts, items from the conflict that might have significance, war relics. Jackson said flatly. Mementos taken from the dead, her grip on his waist tense slightly. Not exactly. He paid fair prices to soldiers who had acquired items honorably. And did he acquire anything from Gettysburg? Jackson asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Elizabeth's silence told him everything. Miss Caldwell, he said, choosing his next words carefully. I believe you're carrying something that once belonged to my family. A silver locket with the Reeves crest, a falcon atop a shield with 3 stars. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed his suspicion. For several long moments, only the sound of Sadie's hooves on the hard-packed earth filled the air between them. How did you know? She finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. I looked in your bag while you were unconscious, he admitted. I was searching for identification in case you didn't wake up. I found the locket. You should have told me last night, she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only resignation. Would you have told me the truth about how it came to be in your possession? Another long pause. Probably not, she conceded. Will you tell me now? He asked, slowing Sadie to a walk. Elizabeth sighed, her breath warm against his back. My father acquired it from a Confederate soldier who claimed to have taken it from a Union officer at Gettysburg, Lieutenant Matthew Reeves. The name of his brother, spoken aloud by this stranger, sent a jolt through Jackson. Matthew was my brother, he said thickly. That locket was a family heirloom. Our mother gave it to him before he went to war. It was supposed to protect him. I'm sorry, Elizabeth said softly. Truly, I had no idea. The locket belongs with the Reeves family, Jackson said. It's all I have left of my brother. I understand, Elizabeth replied, and you have every right to it. But Mr. Reeves, Jackson, that locket is more than just a family heirloom. It's one of the artifacts Blackwood is seeking. It's why I ran. Jackson reined Sadie to a stop, turning in the saddle to look at Elizabeth. What are you saying? Her blue eyes met his, filled with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. I'm saying that locket has properties beyond the sentimental. My father believed it's one of 13 objects that, when brought together, reveal the location of a treasure beyond imagining. Jackson stared at her incredulously. That's fantastic, unbelievable, she finished for him. I know how it sounds, but my father dedicated his life to finding these artifacts, and men like Augustus Blackwood have killed for less. Jackson turned back around, urging Sadie forward again. The desert stretched endlessly before them, heat already beginning to shimmer off the distant rocks. I don't believe in magic or treasures, he said finally, but I do believe in family. That locket is mine by right, and I'll return it to you, Elizabeth promised. Once we reach San Francisco, once it's safe. It wasn't the answer Jackson wanted, but it was the only one he was likely to get. For now, they were stuck with each other. A scarred cowboy and an elegant lady with a carpet bag full of secrets, riding west along the railroad tracks into the unknown. They rode in uneasy silence as the sun climbed higher, the heat intensifying with each passing hour. Jackson's mind churned with conflicting emotions. Anger at the theft of his brother's locket, skepticism about Elizabeth's fantastical claims, and an unwelcome attraction to the woman who pressed against his back. She was clearly educated, refined, everything he was not. And yet here they were, bound together by a silver trinket and the ghosts it carried. These properties you mentioned, he said finally, breaking the silence. What exactly does the locket supposedly do? Elizabeth shifted behind him. It's not what it does, she explained. It's what it contains. According to my father's research, each of the 13 artifacts holds a piece of a map, invisible to the naked eye, but revealed under certain conditions. And what does this map lead to? Jackson asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. My father believed it leads to a cache of sacred knowledge, wisdom from ancient civilizations that was hidden to protect it from destruction. She paused. Others, like Blackwood, believe it leads to gold, or weapons of unimaginable power. And what do you believe? I believe my father was a good man who died protecting something important, she said simply. And I intend to honor his final wish that the collection reach my uncle intact, Jackson grunted, unconvinced but unwilling to argue further. The desert offered no shade, and conversation only dried the mouth faster. They needed to conserve their energy and water. Around midday, the terrain began to change. The flat desert gave way to rocky outcroppings, and the railroad tracks curved around a ridge of red stone. Jackson reined Sadie to a stop in the shadow of a large boulder, offering momentary respite from the sun. "We'll rest here," he announced. Dismounting, he helped Elizabeth down, her body light in his hands as he lowered her to the ground. She winced as her feet touched the earth. "Those boots weren't made for walking," Jackson observed, noting the fine leather now scuffed and cracked. "I've managed worse," Elizabeth replied with surprising stoicism. She settled on a flat rock, smoothing her skirts with habitual grace. Even trail-worn and dusty, she maintained an air of dignity that Jackson found oddly admirable. He offered her the canteen, watching as she took measured sips. Conservation was second nature to desert travelers, and Elizabeth seemed to understand the principle without being told. Another unexpected quality in a city woman. "You said your uncle was your father's partner," Jackson remarked, taking the canteen back. "In collecting these artifacts," Elizabeth nodded. "Dr. Theodore Caldwell. He's a professor of archaeology at Berkeley now, but in his younger days, he and my father traveled the world together. They made quite the team. My father had the intuition for finding artifacts, and Uncle Theodore had the academic knowledge to authenticate them. And why did they part ways?" A shadow crossed Elizabeth's face. "There was a disagreement about the purpose of their collection. My uncle believed the artifacts should be studied, displayed in museums. My father believed some were too powerful for public knowledge." She sighed. "They didn't speak for many years, but before he died, my father wrote to Theodore, reconciling. That's why I know my uncle will help us. If we make it to San Francisco," Jackson said grimly. "We've got a long way to go, and limited supplies." "There's a trading post at Eagle Canyon, isn't there?" Elizabeth asked. "I saw it marked on a map in the train." Jackson raised an eyebrow, impressed by her observation. "Yes, about 2 days' ride from here, but we'll need to be careful. If these men are pursuing you along the railroad, they might check such places." Elizabeth nodded, her expression resolute. "I can disguise myself. I'm quite adept at becoming unremarkable when necessary." Something in her tone made Jackson suspect she'd had practice at disappearing. Another piece of the puzzle that was Elizabeth Caldwell. They rested for 30 minutes, then continued their journey. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to move away from the railroad tracks and into the foothills. Jackson chose their path carefully, looking for game trails that would accommodate Sadie while providing some cover from any pursuers. "Your brother," Elizabeth said softly as they picked their way through a narrow ravine. "What was he like?" The question caught Jackson off guard. Few people asked about Matthew anymore. Most assumed the wound was too raw to touch. "He was everything I wasn't," Jackson replied after a moment. "Smart, well-spoken, had plans to study law after the war." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Our father used to say, Matthew got the brains and I got the brawn. And yet you both fought," Elizabeth observed. "Family duty," Jackson said simply. "The Reeves men have served in every American conflict since the Revolution. When the call came, we answered. You were there when he died." The question was gentle, tentative. Jackson's hands tightened on the reins. "No. Different regiments?" "I was with the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry. Matthew was infantry, 83rd Pennsylvania. I didn't know he'd fallen until 3 days after Gettysburg." The memory of that moment, the officer approaching with the letter, the world tilting beneath his feet, still had the power to hollow him out inside. By the time I got leave to go to him, he was already buried in a mass grave. All they could tell me was that his personal effects had been lost, stolen, Elizabeth corrected softly, by the man who sold the locket to my father. Yes, the word came out harsher than he intended. They rode in silence for another mile, the only sounds the creak of leather and Sadie's labored breathing as she navigated the rocky slope. I lost someone too, Elizabeth said suddenly. In the war, Jackson glanced over his shoulder, surprised by the confession. My fiancé, she continued, Richard Harrington. He was with the 20th Massachusetts, killed at Cold Harbor. I'm sorry, Jackson said, and meant it. The war had created a nation of mourners, a brotherhood and sisterhood of grief that transcended station or background. The locket, Elizabeth said hesitantly. But may I ask who is pictured inside it? My parents, Jackson replied. It was a wedding gift from my father to my mother. Tradition holds that each Reeves bride receives it on her wedding day, adding her portrait alongside her husband's. My mother gave it to Matthew before he left, hoping it would bring him home safely. He laughed bitterly. Fat lot of good it did. Perhaps it was meant to find its way back to you, Elizabeth suggested softly. Through me? Jackson didn't respond. He didn't believe in fate or divine providence. Not anymore. The war had beaten such notions out of him, along with his youth and innocence. As the afternoon waned, clouds began gathering on the western horizon. Jackson eyed them warily. Desert storms were rare but violent when they came. We need to find shelter before nightfall, he announced. There's a box canyon ahead with a cave system. We can weather the storm there. They pushed forward, Sadie struggling on the increasingly steep terrain. Elizabeth held tight to Jackson's waist as the horse picked her way carefully around loose shale and sudden drop-offs. The wind began to rise, carrying the electric scent of rain. The first fat droplets were just beginning to fall when they reached the canyon entrance. Jackson dismounted quickly, helping Elizabeth down. The sky had darkened ominously, and thunder rumbled in the distance. This way, he urged, leading Sadie by the reins toward a dark opening in the canyon wall. Mind your step. The cave was shallow but dry, with enough room for both of them and Sadie. Jackson quickly unsaddled the horse, rubbing her down with a piece of cloth from his saddlebag. Elizabeth stood at the cave entrance, watching the rain begin to fall in earnest, her carpetbag clutched to her chest. It's beautiful, she murmured. In its way. Jackson moved to stand beside her. The storm had unleashed its fury now, rain coming down in sheets, transforming the dusty canyon floor into muddy rivulets. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the landscape in stark white light. Beautiful and deadly, he remarked. That flash floods can fill this canyon in minutes. As if on cue, a torrent of water suddenly rushed past the cave entrance, already ankle-deep and rising. Elizabeth stepped back instinctively. We're high enough, Jackson reassured her, but it's going to be a long night. They retreated deeper into the cave. Jackson gathered what dry brush he could find near the entrance and started a small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rock wall, creating a small circle of warmth and light against the storm's fury. Elizabeth sat close to the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest, the carpetbag never far from her reach. In the firelight, with her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders and Jackson's too large shirt enveloping her slender frame, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Thank you, she said suddenly, looking up at him. Urged for helping me. You could have left me by the tracks or handed me over to the authorities at the next town. You didn't have to involve yourself in my troubles. Jackson prodded the fire with a stick, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Don't thank me yet, Miss Caldwell. We're a long way from San Francisco, and if this storm doesn't let up, we might be stuck here for days. Elizabeth, she corrected gently. I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you? After all, I'm wearing your shirt, riding your horse, and sharing your cave. A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of Jackson's mouth. I suppose we have Elizabeth. Her name felt intimate on his tongue, a small transgression against propriety that somehow seemed right in this moment, with the storm raging outside and the future uncertain. And tell me about the locket, he said, settling back against the cave wall. What makes it one of these 13 special artifacts? Elizabeth stared into the flames for a long moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing the canyon in violent sheets, while thunder echoed off the stone walls. The locket isn't just silver, she began. "Untold, the metal was mined from a specific quarry in Cornwall, England, believed by ancient Celts to be a gateway between worlds. It was forged in 1776 by a silversmith named Ezekiel Reeves. Your ancestor, I presume." Jackson nodded. "My great-grandfather. He made it as a wedding gift for his bride. What he may not have known was that the silver contained trace elements not found anywhere else on Earth," Elizabeth continued. "Elements that, according to my father's research, allow it to contain hidden information, visible only under specific conditions." "What conditions?" Jackson asked, skepticism evident in his voice. Elizabeth reached for her carpetbag, hesitating only briefly before opening it. She withdrew the velvet-wrapped bundle that contained the locket. "May I?" Jackson nodded, watching intently as she unwrapped the locket and held it reverently in her palm. It looked smaller than he remembered, the silver dulled with age, but the falcon crest remained clear and proud. "The 13 artifacts respond to one another," she explained. "When brought into proximity with its counterparts, the locket will reveal its secret." She turned it over, showing him the back where an intricate pattern of swirls had been engraved around the edge. "These aren't merely decorative, they're part of a coded message." "And how many of these artifacts do you possess?" Jackson asked. 3, Elizabeth admitted. "The locket, a compass that belonged to a Spanish conquistador, and a small bronze key from ancient Egypt." She reached into the bag again, extracting a leather pouch. "My father collected 7 in total during his lifetime. I was forced to leave 4 behind when I fled Boston. And Blackwood has the others. He has at least 2 that we know of. The remaining artifacts are scattered around the world, or lost to time." She returned the locket to its velvet wrapping. "My father believed Blackwood's interest wasn't academic or even financial. He fears Blackwood belongs to an ancient order that seeks to use the artifacts' power for darker purposes." Jackson leaned back against the cave wall, processing her word. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all as fantasy, the delusions of a grieving daughter carrying on her father's obsession. And yet there was a conviction in Elizabeth's voice, a clarity in her eyes that made him hesitate to reject her story outright. "Even if all this is true," he said finally, "why risk your life? Why not turn these artifacts over to Blackwood or the authorities? Let someone else worry about ancient mysteries and secret maps." Elizabeth's expression hardened. "Because my father died protecting them. Because he believed they were important enough to sacrifice everything for." Her voice softened. "And because some things, once lost, can never be recovered. Some knowledge is meant to be protected, not exploited." The fierce conviction in her voice reminded Jackson of his brother. Matthew had possessed that same unwavering belief in causes greater than himself. It had gotten him killed on a Pennsylvania battlefield, believing in the Union even as his life bled out into the mud. "I understand duty," Jackson said quietly. But I've seen what happens when men follow ideals to their graves." "Some things are worth dying for," Elizabeth replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Maybe, but fewer things than most people think." Jackson stood, moving to the cave entrance to check on the storm. Rain still fell in torrents, the canyon below now a rushing river of muddy water. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the landscape in harsh white light. "We're not going anywhere tonight." He returned to the fire, adding the last of their dry brush to the flames. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night fell, and the small fire would soon be their only source of warmth. "We should try to get some rest," he suggested. "Tomorrow will be a long day if the rain stops." Elizabeth nodded, but made no move to lie down. Instead, she remained seated, arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the fire. "May I ask you something, Jackson?" "You can ask." "Your scar," she said softly. "Does it still pain you?" The question caught him off guard. Most people pretended not to notice his disfigurement, or worse, stared when they thought he wasn't looking. "Sometimes," he admitted, "in cold weather, or when rain's coming." The blade went deep, cracked the cheekbone beneath. He touched the jagged line unconsciously. "But it's just a scar. We all have them. Some are just more visible than others. Elizabeth studied him in the firelight, her gaze direct but not pitying. "I think it suits you," she said simply. "It tells a story of survival." Jackson felt a strange warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "And what about you?" he asked. "What scars do you carry?" Elizabeth Caldwell, a sad smile touched her lips. "None so dramatic as yours, but losing my mother at 12, my fiancé at 20, and my father 3 months ago, those leave marks of their own. Yet here you are," Jackson observed, "still fighting." "As are you," she replied. They fell silent, the crackle of the fire and the storm's fury creating a strangely intimate backdrop. Jackson found himself studying Elizabeth's profile, the proud line of her jaw, the delicate curve of her neck, the way the firelight caught in her chestnut hair. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered since the war, a puzzle of strength and vulnerability, refinement and determination. "You should sleep," he said finally, offering her his bedroll. "I'll keep watch." Elizabeth looked as if she might protest, but exhaustion won out. She accepted the bedroll with a grateful nod, arranging it near the fire. The carpet bag she placed beside her pillow, one hand resting protectively upon it even as she lay down. "Wake me in a few hours," she murmured. "You need rest, too." Jackson made a non-committal sound, knowing he'd let her sleep through the night. Rest was a luxury he'd learned to live without during the war. Instead, he settled against the cave wall, Colt revolver across his lap, eyes trained on the stormy darkness beyond the cave entrance. Elizabeth's breathing soon deepened into sleep, her features softening in repose. She looked younger, the worry lines around her eyes momentarily erased. Jackson found himself wondering what her life had been like in Boston, the elegant parties she must have attended, the suitors who surely sought her hand, the future that had awaited her before tragedy and mystery intervened, a future so different from his own aimless wandering. After the war, he drifted westward like so many other broken men, taking work where he could find it, moving on when the memories caught up with him. He owned nothing but his horse, his gun, and the clothes on his back. What could he possibly offer a woman like Elizabeth Caldwell? And yet, the way she looked at him, without flinching from his scar or his rough manners, the courage she showed, fleeing across the country alone to honor her father's dying wish. There was something rare in her, something that called to the part of him he'd thought long dead. The storm began to wane near midnight, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter. Jackson remained vigilant, listening to the sounds of the night returning as the tempest moved on. An owl hooted somewhere nearby, and the drip of water from the cave's entrance created a soothing rhythm. Elizabeth stirred in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible, her hand tightening on the carpet bag. Jackson wondered what she dreamed of, ancient artifacts, the father she'd lost, or the dangers that pursued her. On impulse, he moved closer, gently adjusting the bedroll to better cover her shoulders against the night's chill. As he did so, her eyes fluttered open, momentarily disoriented. "Jackson," she whispered. "I'm here," he reassured her. "Storm's passing, you're safe." She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand with surprising warmth. "Thank you," she murmured, already drifting back to sleep, "for believing me." Had he told her he believed her fantastic tale? Jackson couldn't recall. Yet somehow, despite his skepticism, he found that he did, or at least he believed in her sincerity. Whether the locket truly contained mystical properties seemed less important than the fact that Elizabeth believed it with such conviction. As the night deepened, Jackson found himself making a silent promise, not just to see her safely to San Francisco, but to protect her from Blackwood and his agents, whatever the cost. The locket was his by right, yes, but recovering it would mean nothing if harm came to Elizabeth in the process. Dawn broke with fragile clarity, the storm having washed the desert air clean. Jackson, who had dozed intermittently throughout the night, rose stiffly to check the canyon below. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a transformed landscape, mud-slicked rocks, uprooted brush, and most concerning, clear tracks leading into the canyon. Boot prints. At least 3 men, recent. Jackson returned to the cave quickly, touching Elizabeth's shoulder to wake her. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Blackwood's men have found our trail." Elizabeth was instantly alert, years of practiced vigilance erasing any lingering drowsiness. She gathered the carpet bag to her chest, already reaching for her boots. "How many?" she whispered. lacing them with swift, efficient movements. 3 by the tracks. Could be more. Jackson was already saddling Sadie, his movements quick but methodical. They're approaching from the canyon floor. If we move along the ridge, we might be able to circle behind them. Elizabeth nodded, rising to her feet. She'd abandoned any pretense of Boston gentility now, her expression focused and determined. She quickly rolled up the bedding and helped Jackson pack their meager supplies. The storm was a blessing and a curse, Jackson muttered, checking his Colt before holstering it. Washed away our earlier tracks, but left these new ones clear as day in the mud. How did they find us? Elizabeth wondered. We left the railroad tracks miles back. Someone at the line shack, maybe. Or they've been following at a distance all along. Jackson led Sadie to the cave entrance, peering cautiously outside. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon, but there was no movement below. "Oh, we need to move now, while they're still searching the lower caves." He helped Elizabeth mount, then swung up behind her, reversing their previous arrangement. "I need a clear draw if it comes to shooting," he explained, settling her in front of him. She nodded, understanding the grim practicality. They emerged from the cave into the crisp morning air, Sadie's hooves finding purchase on the rain-slicked stone with practiced care. Instead of descending back to the canyon floor, Jackson guided them along a narrow ledge that curved around the canyon wall, gradually ascending toward the ridge above. "Keep your weight forward," he instructed Elizabeth softly. "Let Sadie find her own footing." Elizabeth complied, leaning slightly into the mare's neck, her body tense but balanced. The carpet bag was secured to the saddle horn within easy reach, but no longer clutched in her hands. She needed them free now, for balance and, if necessary, defense. They had nearly reached the top of the ridge when a shout echoed from below. Looking back, Jackson saw 3 men at the mouth of their abandoned cave, one pointing upward toward their position. The distance was too great for accurate pistol fire, but it wouldn't be long before the pursuers found a path up to the ridge. "They've spotted us," he said grimly. "Hold tight." Once they crested the ridge, Jackson urged Sadie into a gallop across the relatively flat terrain beyond. The desert stretched before them, still glistening with rainwater, the morning sun transforming shallow puddles into mirrors of gold. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. "There's a trading post about 15 miles northwest," Jackson called over the rushing wind. If we can reach it by midday, we might be able to throw them off our trail." Elizabeth nodded, her hair streaming behind her like a chestnut banner. She rode well, Jackson noted with approval, her body moving in rhythm with Sadie's stride. Another unexpected quality in a Boston socialite. They rode hard for 2 hours, pushing Sadie to her limits before finally slowing to a walk. The mare's flanks were heaving, foam flecking her neck. They needed to rest her or risk losing their only means of outpacing their pursuers. "We can't stop long," Jackson said, dismounting and helping Elizabeth down, just enough to let her catch her breath. Elizabeth nodded, stretching her cramped leg. Despite the grueling pace, she showed no signs of complaint. She moved to Sadie's head, stroking the mare's velvety nose with gentle appreciation. "She's magnificent," she said softly. "Arabian bloodlines, quarter horse mostly, but yes, some Arabian a few generations back," Jackson replied, surprised by her knowledge of horses. "My father bred her." "The Reeves men and their horses?" Elizabeth smiled. "Richard, my fiancé, told me once that a cavalryman's relationship with his mount was sacred, more important than any human bond in battle." "Your fiancé was right," Jackson said, checking Sadie's hooves for stones. "A good horse can mean the difference between life and death." He glanced up at Elizabeth. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Caldwell. Horse breeding isn't typical conversation in Boston drawing rooms, I'd imagine." A shadow crossed her face. "I wasn't always confined to drawing rooms. My mother was an accomplished horsewoman. Before she died, she taught me to ride, to really ride, not just perch side saddle for show." Jackson straightened, seeing her in a new light. "And your father allowed this?" "My father encouraged it," Elizabeth replied. "He believed women should be capable in all things, said the ancient priestesses he studied were equal to any man in skill and wisdom." Her voice softened. "And he was ahead of his time in many ways." Before Jackson could respond, a distant cloud of dust on the horizon caught his attention. 3 riders, moving fast. "They've found our trail," he said tersely. "We need to move." They mounted quickly, but Jackson knew Sadie couldn't maintain another hard gallop, not without rest and water. The trading post was still at least 10 miles away, too far. "And there's a rock formation about 2 miles ahead," he said, pointing to a cluster of towering red boulders in the distance. "We might be able to hold them off there. Better defensively than open ground." Elizabeth nodded grimly. "How many bullets do you have?" 12 in my belt, 6 in the Colt. You!" She reached into her boot and extracted a small derringer, no bigger than her palm. 5, she said simply. Jackson raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Another surprise from the Boston lady. They reached the rock formation with their pursuers still a mile behind. It was better than Jackson had hoped. A natural fortress of tumbled boulders, with a sheltered hollow in the center that could conceal Sadie. More importantly, it offered clear lines of sight in all directions and multiple positions from which to defend. "To get Sadie into that central space," Jackson instructed, dismounting. "Then find cover. I'll try to discourage them before they get too close." Elizabeth did as he asked, leading the tired mare into the protected hollow. Jackson climbed to a vantage point atop one of the larger boulders, rifle in hand. From here, he could see the 3 riders clearly now, 2 dressed like typical ranch hands, but the third in a tailored black coat that marked him as something else entirely, Blackwood himself, perhaps. When they were within 300 yards, Jackson fired a warning shot that kicked up dust just in front of the lead rider's horse. The animal shied, nearly unseating one of the men. The riders pulled up, conferring briefly before spreading out to approach from different angles. Smart, Jackson thought grimly. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters. He fired again, this time coming closer to the rider in black, who immediately retreated behind a small rise. The other 2, however, continued their approach, using what little cover the terrain provided. "They're trying to flank us," Jackson called to Elizabeth, who watched the eastern approach. "I see them," she replied calmly. She had positioned herself behind a boulder with her derringer ready, the carpetbag secure beside her. Her composure under fire was remarkable. The standoff continued for nearly an hour, Jackson conserving ammunition, firing only when one of the men made a dash toward better position. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying as midday approached. Water would soon become as pressing a concern as ammunition. During a lull in the exchange, Elizabeth called softly to Jackson, "I need to show you something. In case..." She didn't finish the thought. Jackson glanced over. She had opened the carpet bag and withdrawn a small object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it, she revealed an ancient-looking bronze key, no larger than her index finger. The top was shaped like a scarab beetle, its details worn but still discernible. "This is one of the 3 artifacts I carry," she explained. "If anything happens to me, you need to take this and the locket to my uncle in San Francisco. The 3rd artifact is hidden in a compartment in the bag itself." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Jackson replied firmly. Elizabeth gave him a sad smile. "We both know that's not a promise either of us can keep." She rewrapped the key and tucked it into his shirt pocket, just in case. The intimacy of the gesture, her fingers brushing against his chest, sent an unexpected warmth through him, despite the dire circumstances. Before he could respond, a bullet pinged off the rock near his head, spraying stone fragments across his cheek. "They're getting bolder," he muttered, returning fire and forcing one of the flanking men to retreat. The exchange intensified over the next 20 minutes, the attackers gradually working their way closer despite Jackson's efforts to keep them at bay. He was down to his last 8 bullets when a new sound cut through the desert air. Hoofbeats approaching fast from the west. "More of them?" Elizabeth asked, alarm evident in her voice. Jackson peered cautiously over the boulder. 6 riders were approaching at a gallop, but they weren't dressed like Blackwood's men. Their clothing and horsemanship marked them as Paiute, Jackson said, recognizing the Native American riders. "But I don't know if that's good news or bad for us." The approaching warriors didn't slow their pace, riding directly toward the rocks where Blackwood's men had taken cover. Gunshots rang out, the attackers firing at the newcomers, but the Paiute warriors were expert horsemen, weaving and ducking as they charged forward, returning fire with rifles of their own. "What's happening?" Elizabeth asked, unable to see from her position. "They're attacking Blackwood's men," Jackson replied, watching in astonishment as the three pursuers abandoned their positions and fled eastward, the Paiute riders in close pursuit. Within minutes, the gunfire had faded into the distance, leaving only dust clouds hanging in the still air. Jackson remained vigilant, unsure if the warriors would return, and if they did, whether they would be friendly to the two white strangers hiding among the rocks. Why would they help her? Elizabeth wondered aloud, echoing his thoughts. I don't know that they were helping us, Jackson replied. They might have had their own quarrel with Blackwood's men, or perhaps he fell silent as a single rider appeared from the western approach, moving at a steady walk. It was one of the Paiute warriors, an older man with grey streaks in his long black hair. He rode directly toward their position, making no attempt to conceal his approach. Stay back, Jackson warned Elizabeth, raising his rifle. To his surprise, the warrior raised his hand in a gesture of peace, then called out in clear English, "The woman carries the sacred objects. We have been watching for her." Jackson kept his rifle trained on the warrior, but his finger eased away from the trigger. "How do you know about the woman or what she carries?" he called back. The warrior remained still on his horse, his weathered face impassive. "I am Grey Wolf, elder of the Paiute people. We have been guardians of the sacred knowledge for many generations." His dark eyes shifted to where Elizabeth had emerged from behind her boulder. "Your father was known to us, daughter of Josiah." Elizabeth gasped softly. "You knew my father?" Grey Wolf nodded once. "Many seasons ago, he came to our lands, seeking wisdom about the 13 treasures. He showed respect where others had shown only greed. We shared with him what our ancestors had passed down." Jackson lowered his rifle slightly, but remained wary. "Convenient timing. Your arrival. Not convenience. Purpose." Grey Wolf dismounted with the fluid grace of a man half his age. "We have watched the Iron Horse path since word reached us of Josiah Caldwell's passing. When the rain spirits washed the earth, our scouts found your tracks leading into the high desert." Elizabeth stepped forward, her expression a mixture of wonder and wariness. "My father never told me about you. He kept many secrets, even from those he loved," Grey Wolf replied. "It was necessary. The knowledge he sought has brought death to its keepers for centuries." Jackson and Elizabeth exchanged glances. The warrior's words aligned with her father's warnings about Blackwood and the artifacts. "Those men," Jackson said, gesturing toward the direction Blackwood's agents had fled. "They'll be back with reinforcements." Grey Wolf nodded. "Yes, the Dark One, Blackwood, has many who serve him. They will not stop." He turned to Elizabeth. "You seek your father's brother in the city by the Great Water?" Elizabeth's surprise was evident. "How did you know?" "Your father spoke of his plan before the final journey. If death found him, his daughter would carry the sacred objects west to the one who shared his blood." Jackson holstered his pistol but kept his hand near it. Despite the warrior's apparent knowledge, years of frontier caution made him reluctant to trust too quickly. "We need to keep moving. Our horse is exhausted, and we're low on supplies." Grey Wolf gestured toward the west. "Our village lies hidden in the foothills. 2 hours' ride from here. You will find rest and safety there while your horse regains strength." He paused, his gaze moving between them. "And there is one among us who may help you understand what you carry. We accept your invitation," Elizabeth said, before Jackson could respond. At his questioning look, she added softly, "My father trusted them. So will I." Jackson sighed, knowing they had few options. Their pursuers would return, better prepared and in greater numbers. Sadie needed rest, and their supplies were dangerously low. "Lead on, then," he said to Grey Wolf. The warrior whistled, and shortly after, another Paiute rider appeared, leading 2 spare horses. Grey Wolf spoke to him in their native tongue, then turned back to Jackson and Elizabeth. "Flying Eagle will take you to our village. I will join the others to ensure the Dark Ones do not follow." He mounted his horse with fluid grace. "We will speak more when I return." As Grey Wolf rode away, Elizabeth approached the young warrior called Flying Eagle. He was younger than Grey Wolf by several decades, with sharp eyes that assessed them carefully. "Thank you for your help," Elizabeth said, speaking slowly and clearly. Flying Eagle nodded but said nothing, merely gesturing to the spare horses. Jackson helped Elizabeth mount one, then loaded their meager belongings onto the other before climbing aboard himself. Sadie would follow without being led, trained to stay with her master. They rode in silence, Flying Eagle leading them west through a landscape that gradually transformed from barren desert to sparse grassland. Small clusters of juniper and pine began to appear as they gained elevation, providing welcome shade against the afternoon sun. "What do you make of this?" Jackson asked quietly as they rode side by side. "I'm not sure," Elizabeth admitted. "My father traveled extensively, but he never specifically mentioned the Paiute people to me. Still, it makes sense. Many native tribes have oral histories dating back thousands of years. If the artifacts are as old as my father believed, these people might have knowledge that was never recorded in any European text. Or they could be leading us into a trap," Jackson pointed out pragmatically. Elizabeth studied his profile. The hard line of his jaw, the scar that etched its way across his weathered skin. "You don't trust easily, do you?" "Trust is a luxury in this country," he replied simply, "one I've rarely been able to afford." "And yet you trusted me," she observed, "a stranger with a fantastic story and your family's locket." Jackson was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "And maybe I'm getting soft in my old age," he finally said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Elizabeth laughed softly. "You can't be more than 35? 32, he corrected. "But out here, that's practically ancient." Their guide glanced back at the sound of laughter but said nothing, his expression remaining inscrutable as he led them deeper into the foothills. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge that revealed a hidden valley nestled among the hill. A creek wound through its center, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. Scattered among the trees were several dozen wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings made of branches and hides, and the smoke from cooking fires rose in thin columns against the azure sky. Flying Eagle led them down a narrow trail into the valley. As they approached the village, children stopped their play to watch the strangers arrive, their curious eyes following Jackson's scarred face and Elizabeth's unusual attire. Women paused in their work, and men gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices. They were led to a larger wickiup near the center of the village. Flying Eagle dismounted and gestured for them to do the same, then spoke his first words to them. "Wait here, the grandmother will come." As their guide took their horses to be watered and fed, Jackson and Elizabeth stood awkwardly outside the dwelling, conscious of the many eyes upon them. "The grandmother," Jackson whispered. "Perhaps their healer or spiritual leader," Elizabeth suggested. Before they could speculate further, the wickiup's entrance flap was pushed aside and an elderly woman emerged. Her face was deeply lined, her silver hair braided with small fetishes of bone and feather. Despite her advanced age, she stood straight and moved with purpose. Her dark eyes, sharp and intelligent, assessed them with unnerving intensity. "I am Many Dreams," she announced in perfect English. "Grey Wolf has sent word of your coming, the daughter of Josiah and the warrior with the marked face." Elizabeth stepped forward, offering a respectful nod. "No, thank you for receiving us, grandmother." Many Dreams acknowledged the greeting with a slight inclination of her head. "You carry 3 of the sacred 13, she stated, rather than asked. "The key of Thoth, the compass of Coronado, and the silver heart." "The silver heart," Jackson repeated, glancing at Elizabeth. "Your family's locket," Elizabeth explained softly. "It is its true name, according to my father's research." Many Dreams gestured for them to enter the wickiup. Inside, a small fire burned in a central pit, its smoke escaping through a hole in the top of the structure. Woven mats covered the ground, and various herbs and fetishes hung from the supporting poles. The air was fragrant with sage and cedar. "Sit," the old woman instructed, lowering herself gracefully to a mat opposite the entrance. "Or you have question, I have answered. But first, I must see what you carry." Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before retrieving the carpet bag. Under Many Dream, watchful gaze, she carefully removed the 3 artifacts: the locket, the small bronze key, and a tarnished brass compass with intricate engravings on its face. Many Dreams studied them without touching, her eyes moving from one to the other with reverent recognition. "The 3 become one," she murmured, "as it was foretold." "Foretold?" Jackson asked, his skepticism evident despite his attempt at respect. The old woman's gaze shifted to him, sharp and challenging. "You doubt because you have not seen, but you wear the mark of one who has walked between worlds." Her finger traced the air along the path of his scar. "Death It touched you but did not take you. That is why the silver heart has found its way back to you. Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. How could she know he had nearly died from the wound that scarred his face? He had never spoken of those feverish days when he'd hovered between life and death in a field hospital at Antietam. The artifacts, Elizabeth prompted gently. Can you tell us more about them? About what they reveal when brought together. Many Dreams nodded slowly. I will tell you what my people have guarded for generations, but first, you must understand that knowledge carries responsibility and danger. Her eyes moved between them, solemn and searching. Are you prepared for both? Elizabeth and Jackson exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. In the short time they had traveled together, they had developed an understanding that transcended words, a bond forged through shared danger and mutual respect. We're prepared, Elizabeth answered for both of them. Many Dreams nodded, satisfied with their resolve. She cast a handful of herbs onto the fire, filling the wickie up with fragrant smoke that smelled of sage, sweetgrass, and something more exotic that neither could identify. The flames danced higher, casting shifting shadows across the old woman's face. The 13 artifacts were created by an ancient brotherhood, she began, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. Men and women of knowledge who walked the earth when the world was young. They came from different lands, Egypt, Babylon, Greece, China, and lands across the great waters. They gathered their wisdom in one place, hidden from those who would misuse it. Jackson listened with guarded skepticism, but found himself drawn into the tale despite his doubt. There was something hypnotic about Many Dreams, storytelling, a conviction that made even the fantastic seem plausible. This wisdom was not merely words written on paper, she continued. It was knowledge of the earth's deepest secrets, how to heal the body and spirit, how to harness the elements, how to see beyond the veil between worlds, knowledge that, in greedy hands, could bring great destruction. Like weapons? Jackson asked. Many Dreams shook her head. More dangerous than any weapon made by man. This knowledge touches the very fabric of creation. She gestured to the artifacts laid before them. Bim. When the Brotherhood saw darkness coming, men who would use their wisdom for power rather than enlightenment, they divided their knowledge into 13 parts. Each part was hidden within an object that would pass through history unremarked, carried by those who did not know its true value. And the locket, the silver heart, is one of these objects, Elizabeth prompted. Yes, the silversmith who crafted it was a descendant of the Brotherhood, though he did not know it. He worked by inspiration, following patterns that came to him in dreams. Many Dreams reached toward the locket, but stopped short of touching it. The silver carries the wisdom of healing, body, mind, and spirit. It is said that those who possess it find wounds mending, both seen and unseen. Jackson thought of his brother, who had carried the locket to Gettysburg. It hadn't saved him from a Confederate bullet. It didn't protect my brother, he said aloud. Many Dreams fixed him with her penetrating gaze. The artifacts do not grant immortality. Death comes to all eventually, but perhaps your brother's passing was swift rather than lingering. Perhaps he found peace in his final moments. The question struck Jackson like a physical blow. According to the officer who had delivered the news, Matthew had died quickly, a single shot to the heart. And the letter found in his pocket, the last he had written to Jackson, had spoken of a strange sense of calm, of acceptance in the face of what was to come. The key of Thoth, Many Dreams continued, turning her attention to the small bronze key, unlocks hidden knowledge, reveals what is concealed, and the compass of Coronado guides the seeker not just across land and sea, but through the realms of spirit. And when brought together, Elizabeth asked. Together they begin to awaken, the old woman replied. Each artifact calls to the others. When all 13 are gathered, they will reveal the path to the Brotherhood's hidden repository of wisdom. And that's what Blackwood wants, Jackson surmised. This repository, Many Dreams nodded gravely. Augustus Blackwood is the latest in a long line of seekers who would use this knowledge for domination rather than enlightenment. His ancestors have hunted the artifacts for centuries, gathering them one by one. With each piece, his power grows. How many does he possess? Elizabeth asked. 4. Now, the chalice of Hermes, the obsidian mirror, the jade tablet, and most recently, the crystal prism. Many dreams. Expression darkened. He took the prism from its guardian in Mexico last winter. The guardian did not survive. Elizabeth pale. Like my father. Your father died protecting what was in his care. Many dreams confirmed gently. Oh, he knew the risk. But he also knew the importance of keeping the artifacts from Blackwood's hands. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, struggling to reconcile this fantastical tale with his practical nature. So these artifacts are what? Magic. Not magic as your people understand it, the old woman replied. The Brotherhood studied the hidden laws of nature. What seems miraculous to the ignorant is simply knowledge of deeper truths. She gestured to the fire. Is it magic that water extinguishes flame, or that certain plants heal while others poison? The Brotherhood understood such principles at levels your modern science has yet to grasp. Elizabeth leaned forward intently. Now, my father believed these artifacts contained a map that when brought together, they would reveal the location of the repository. Many dreams nodded, yes, but not a map drawn on paper. Each artifact contains a fragment of understanding. Together, they create a path that only the worthy can follow. And how exactly do they do that? Jackson asked, his practical mind still seeking concrete explanations. Instead of answering directly, Many Dreams reached for a small leather pouch hanging from one of the Wiki-Up's support poles. From it, she withdrew a fine powder that sparkled faintly in the firelight. May I? She asked Elizabeth, gesturing to the locket. Elizabeth nodded, curiosity overcoming caution. The old woman sprinkled a pinch of the powder over the silver locket. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the powder settled onto the metal, intricate patterns began to glow with a soft blue light, patterns that hadn't been visible before, flowing across the surface like luminous water. Jackson stared in disbelief. What in God's name? The Brotherhood's mark, Many Dreams explained calmly. Visible only under specific conditions. Each artifact bears such markings, revealed by different means. The glowing patterns were unlike any writing Jackson had ever seen. Not quite hieroglyphics, not quite Chinese characters, yet somehow reminiscent of both. They seemed to shift subtly as he watched, as if alive. What does it say? Elizabeth whispered, entranced. It is not a language as you understand languages, Many Dreams replied. And it speaks directly to the mind of one who has been prepared to receive it. Your father could read some of it. His brother, more. The glowing patterns gradually faded, the powder losing its luminescence as it absorbed into the silver. Jackson reached out tentatively, touching the locket with his fingertip. It felt warm, almost alive. There's more to this than you're telling us, he said, looking directly at Many Dreams. The old woman smiled faintly. Yes, much more, but some knowledge must be earned, not given. She gathered the artifacts carefully, returning them to Elizabeth. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, Grey Wolf will guide you on the next stage of your journey. We're not continuing west to San Francisco, Elizabeth asked, surprised. The path to your uncle is not a straight line, Many Dreams replied cryptically. First, you must go north to the place the Brotherhood called the Sentinel Stones. There, the Silver Heart will reveal more of its secrets. North, Jackson frowned. That's rough country. Blackwood's men will be looking for us. Yes, but they do not know of the hidden trails. Grey Wolf does. Many Dreams rose, signaling an end to their conversation. Food and clean clothing will be brought to you. Rest well. The path ahead demands strength of body and spirit. After the old woman had left, Jackson and Elizabeth sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of what they had learned settling between them. Do you believe her? Elizabeth finally asked. Jackson sighed, rubbing his scarred cheek absently. A week ago, I would have said she was spinning tale, but after what I just saw, he shook his head. I don't know what to believe anymore. I believe her, Elizabeth said softly. It aligns with everything my father told me, everything in his journals, and it explains why Blackwood is so determined to obtain these artifacts. Jackson studied her face in the flickering firelight, the delicate curve of her cheek, the determination in her eyes, the strand of chestnut hair that had escaped her makeshift braid. In that moment, she looked both vulnerable and formidable, a contradiction that fascinated him. Why did you show me the key earlier? he asked suddenly. During the standoff, you could have kept all this secret. Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. Because I've come to trust you, Jackson Reeves, and because she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, because I believe our meeting wasn't chance. The locket brought you back into its path for a reason. You think this is fate? He asked skeptically. I think there are patterns in the world we don't fully understand, she replied. Call it fate if you wish. Jackson wanted to dismiss the notion, to cling to his practical view of a world governed by simple cause and effect. But the glowing symbols on his family's locket had shaken that certainty. And the way Elizabeth looked at him now, with trust and something deeper, something that made his heart quicken, despite his better judgment, was harder to dismiss than any mystical tale. If we're going north, he said finally, we'll need supplies. Better weapons. The country gets harsh past the Great Salt Lake. Elizabeth smiled, recognizing his words for what they were. Acceptance of their shared path, whatever mysteries it might hold. And then it's fortunate we have allies who know the land, she said, reaching across the space between them to touch his hand. Her fingers were warm against his calloused skin, the contact brief but charged with unspoken meaning. In that simple gesture, Jackson felt something he had thought long dead, hope. Fragile but undeniable, blooming in the wasteland of his war-scarred heart. Dawn broke over the Paiute village with soft golden light, illuminating the mist that rose from the creek and drifted between the wickiups. Jackson emerged from the men's lodge where he had spent the night, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping on unfamiliar ground. He had been given clean clothes, buckskin leggings, and a cotton shirt that had clearly been traded from white settlers, but they fit well enough, and his own trail-worn garments had needed washing. Elizabeth was already outside, sitting by one of the cooking fires with many dreams and two younger women. She too had been given fresh clothing, a simple dress of soft-tanned deerskin with subtle beadwork at the collar and hem. Her hair was braided in a single plait down her back, and in the early morning light, she looked more at peace than Jackson had yet seen her. She smiled as he approached, the genuine warmth in her expression catching him off guard. "Good morning," she greeted him. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied, accepting a wooden cup of strong, dark tea from one of the women with a nod of thanks. "Any sign of Grey Wolf?" "He returned before dawn," Elizabeth said. "He's preparing for our journey north." Many dreams gestured for Jackson to sit. "Grey Wolf has seen no sign of the Dark Ones," she said, "but they will not abandon their hunt. The Silverheart calls to its counterparts, and Blackwood can sense its movement." Jackson sipped the bitter tea, finding it surprisingly invigorating. "And how far north are these sentinel stones?" 7 days' journey, the old woman replied, "through country few white men have seen." That explained the change in attire, Jackson realized. Their previous clothing would have stood out in the wilderness, making them easy targets for Blackwood's men or any other threat they might encounter. "And once we reach these stones," he asked, "the Silver Heart will show the way." Many Dreams answered cryptically. She rose with surprising agility for her age. "Come, Grey Wolf is waiting." They followed her to the edge of the village, where Grey Wolf stood with 4 pack horses and 3 riding mounts. Sadie was among them, looking refreshed after her day of rest. The warrior was dressed for a long journey, with a rifle slung across his back and a knife at his belt. "The path ahead is difficult," he said without preamble. "We must travel swiftly and leave no trail." Jackson inspected the supplies that had been assembled: dried meat, cornmeal, coffee, and other essentials, along with additional ammunition for his rifle and pistol. The Paiute had been generous, and he wondered what they expected in return. As if reading his thoughts, Grey Wolf said, "My people have guarded the Brotherhood's knowledge for generations. We do not do this for reward, but for the balance of the world." Elizabeth approached Sadie, stroking the mare's neck affectionately. "Your horse has a strong spirit," Grey Wolf observed. "She will serve you well in the mountains." "She's Jackson's," Elizabeth corrected gently. Grey Wolf looked between them, his expression unreadable. "The horse chooses its rider," he said simply, then turned to complete the preparations for departure. Many Dreams approached Elizabeth, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. "For the journey," she said, pressing it into Elizabeth's hands. "When the moon is full, Burn a pinch of this in your fire. It will keep the dark ones, dreams, from finding you." Elizabeth accepted the gift with a respectful nod. "Thank you for all your help." The old woman turned to Jackson next. "You carry more than weapons, scarred one," she said, her dark eyes seeming to look through him rather than at him. "You carry the weight of those you could not save. This burden will be lifted when you accept what the Silver Heart offers." Before Jackson could respond to this unsettling observation, she had turned away, rejoining the small group of villagers who had gathered to witness their departure. Within the hour, they were riding north, following Grey Wolf along a narrow trail that wound through the foothills. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Elizabeth rode beside Jackson, her carpetbag secure across her saddle. She had insisted on carrying the artifacts herself, unwilling to entrust them to the pack horses. "How much of what she told us do you believe?" Jackson asked quietly, when they had put some distance between themselves and Grey Wolf. Elizabeth considered the question. "All of it," she said finally. "My father wasn't a fanciful man, Jackson. He was a scholar, methodical and skeptical by nature. If he believed in the power of these artifacts, it wasn't from superstition." "And your uncle? Does he share these beliefs?" "Uncle Theodore is even more rigorous in his approach to antiquities," Elizabeth replied. "He taught archaeology at Oxford before coming to Berkeley. If anything, he was always the voice of restraint when my father's enthusiasm ran too hot." She glanced at Jackson. "That's why I trust him to safeguard the artifacts. He'll approach their study with caution and wisdom." Jackson nodded, finding comfort in the rational explanation. Whatever mysteries surrounded the locket and its companions, at least their destination made practical sense. The trail gradually steepened as morning gave way to afternoon, leading them higher into the mountains. Grey Wolf set a demanding pace, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and take water. By dusk, they had traveled further than Jackson would have thought possible in a single day. They made camp in a sheltered hollow, where a small spring bubbled from between rocks, providing fresh water. Grey Wolf proved to be a skilled woodsman, constructing a fire that produced heat but minimal smoke that might attract unwanted attention. As they ate a simple meal of dried meat and cornbread, Grey Wolf shared what information he had gathered about Blackwood's men. "They searched the trading posts and settlements," he said, "offering gold for news of a woman and a scarred man traveling west. They have split into smaller groups to cover more ground." "How many men does Blackwood command?" Jackson asked. "Many. Some are mere hired guns who work for gold. Others are devoted followers who believe he will share power when he possesses all 13 artifacts." Grey Wolf's expression darkened. "These are the more dangerous ones. They do not fear death." Elizabeth shivered despite the fire's warmth. "My father mentioned such followers. He called them the Sons of Hermes." Grey Wolf nodded. "An ancient order, as old as the Brotherhood itself. Where one sought wisdom for enlightenment, the other sought it for dominion." The conversation lapsed into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as night settled fully around them. Grey Wolf took the first watch, disappearing into the darkness with silent efficiency. Left alone by the fire, Jackson and Elizabeth sat close together, the night chill providing a convenient excuse for the proximity. "Under your scar," Elizabeth said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "May I ask how it happened? The full story, I mean." Jackson's hand went to his cheek reflexively. Few people had ever asked directly, and fewer still had heard the truth. But Elizabeth's steady gaze invited confidence. "Antietam," he began. "Bloodiest single day of the war. My regiment charged a Confederate position near what they later called Bloody Lane. In the chaos, I found myself face to face with a young rebel lieutenant, no older than 18. He paused, the memory vivid even after all these years. I couldn't shoot him. He looked so damn young. Scared out of his mind. I hesitated. He didn't." Elizabeth's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "His bullet missed, but then he came at me with his saber," Jackson continued. "I managed to block the worst of it with my rifle, but the blade caught me here." He traced the scar's path. "I don't remember much after that. Woke up 3 days later in a field hospital. The surgeon told me I died twice on his table." "But you came back," Elizabeth said softly. "Sometimes I wonder why," Jackson admitted, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "What purpose was there in my survival when so many better men died?" Elizabeth's hand tightened around his. "Perhaps this is your purpose," she suggested. "Here, now, helping me protect something vital from those who would misuse it." Jackson looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the refined Boston lady who had stumbled into his life, but the courageous, determined woman she had revealed herself to be. Something shifted in his chest, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire. "Perhaps," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. Elizabeth leaned closer, her face tilted up to his, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the scarred cowboy and the elegant lady, brought together by fate or chance or something in between. Then, with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, Jackson brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Elizabeth's breath caught, and she moved imperceptibly closer. "Elizabeth," he murmured, her name a question and an answer all at once. And under the vast canopy of stars, with the mysteries of the past and the uncertainties of the future momentarily set aside, their lips met in a kiss that felt, to both of them, like coming home after a long, lonely journey. The journey to the Sentinel Stones took them through some of the most breathtaking and treacherous landscapes Jackson had ever encountered. Towering mountains gave way to hidden valleys, crystal-clear streams cut through ancient forests where few white men had ever set foot. Throughout it all, Grey Wolf led them with unerring confidence, following paths visible only to his experienced eye. For Jackson and Elizabeth, the days were challenging but rewarding. Their kiss by the fireside had changed something between them, dissolving the last barriers of hesitation and doubt. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, shared quiet conversations during their brief rests, and at night they slept near one another beneath the vast canopy of stars, their hands often finding each other in the darkness. It was on the 6th day that Grey Wolf announced they were close to their destination. They had been climbing steadily since dawn, following a narrow trail that wound up the side of a mountain covered in gnarled, wind-twisted pines. The air had grown thinner, and clouds drifted around them like restless spirits. "Beyond the next ridge," Grey Wolf said, pointing ahead, "the place your people once called Titan's Crown." As they crested the ridge, the landscape opened before them, revealing a high alpine plateau. And there, rising from its center like ancient sentinels, stood a circle of massive stone pillars, some still upright, others fallen, but all bearing the unmistakable mark of human craftsmanship, despite their weathered state. "The Sentinel Stones," Elizabeth breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. They dismounted, leaving the horses ground-tied at the plateau's edge. Grey Wolf led them toward the stone circle, his steps measured and respectful. "This place was sacred to many peoples," he explained. "Long before my ancestors came to these lands, the Brotherhood chose it for its power, a place where the veil between worlds grows thin." As they entered the circle, Jackson felt an inexplicable sensation, not unpleasant, but disorienting, like the moment before a lightning strike when the air fills with electricity. Elizabeth gasped softly beside him, suggesting she felt it too. "The Silver Heart," Grey Wolf said, gesturing to the carpet bag Elizabeth carried. "It must be placed on the altar stone." At the center of the circle stood a flat, table-like stone, its surface inscribed with weathered symbols similar to those they had seen glowing on the locket. Elizabeth approached it cautiously, opening her bag to withdraw the silver locket. "All 3 artifacts," Grey Wolf instructed. "Earned together, they will speak to this place." Elizabeth carefully placed the locket, the bronze key, and the brass compass on the altar stone, arranging them in a triangle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the sun emerged from behind a cloud, its rays struck the artifacts directly, and they began to glow. It started with the locket, a soft blue luminescence similar to what they had seen in the wiki-up, but stronger, more vibrant. The light spread to the key and compass, connecting the 3 in a triangle of radiance. Then, astonishingly, the light expanded outward, flowing across the altar stone and illuminating the inscriptions there. "What's happening?" Jackson asked, his voice hushed. "The Silver Heart recognizes its purpose," Grey Wolf replied. Watch. The blue light continued to spread, flowing from the altar to the standing stones themselves. As it touched each pillar, symbols became visible, glowing inscriptions that had been invisible moments before. Within minutes, the entire circle was illuminated with pulsing blue light, creating a dome of radiance above them. Elizabeth moved closer to Jackson, her hand finding his. It's beautiful, she whispered. Within the dome of light, the air seemed to shimmer and condense, forming translucent images, ghostly maps and diagrams that hovered in the air before them. Jackson recognized mountain ranges, rivers, coastlines, a map unlike any he had seen, yet unmistakably depicting the Western Territories. A single point glowed more brightly than the others, pulsing like a heartbeat. The repository, Elizabeth said with certainty. It's showing us the way, Grey Wolf nodded solemnly. Now you understand why Blackwood pursues the artifact so relentlessly. With all 13, he could find the Brotherhood's hidden knowledge and bend it to his will. As they stood transfixed by the spectacle, a sudden shout from the ridge broke the spell. Grey Wolf whirled, his hand going to his rifle. Blackwood's men, he said grimly. They have found us. The light from the artifacts flickered, as if responding to the threat. Elizabeth quickly gathered them, returning them to her carpet bag. How did they find us? She asked, her voice tense. The Silver Heart's awakening, Grey Wolf explained. It calls to its counterparts. Blackwood would have felt it through the artifacts he possesses. Jackson drew his Colt, scanning the ridge where several mounted figures had appeared. How many? 6. Perhaps 7, Grey Wolf replied. Too many to fight in open ground. The horses, Elizabeth urged. If we can reach them. A rifle shot cracked through the air, the bullet striking one of the stone pillars with a shower of sparks. Jackson pulled Elizabeth behind the altar stone for cover. They're coming down, he observed grimly, as the riders began descending the steep trail toward the plateau. Grey Wolf's expression was resolute. I will hold them here. You two must reach the horses and ride west, following the map you saw. There is a hidden pass through the mountains. If you reach it by nightfall, you can evade pursuit. We are not leaving you, Elizabeth protested. This is my purpose, the warrior replied firmly, as protecting the artifacts is yours. Jackson recognized the look in Grey Wolf's eyes, the same expression he'd seen in soldiers who had made their peace with death. He clasped the warrior's shoulder briefly, a gesture of respect between men who understood sacrifice. Go, Grey Wolf urged. Now, while I draw their fire. With a final nod of gratitude, Jackson took Elizabeth's hand, and they ran in a crouch toward the edge of the stone circle. Behind them, Grey Wolf moved in the opposite direction, firing his rifle to attract the attackers' attention. They reached the horses just as gunfire erupted in earnest behind them. Jackson helped Elizabeth mount quickly, then swung onto Sadie's back. As they urged their horses down the western slope of the plateau, Elizabeth looked back one last time at the sentinel stones, where flashes of gunfire punctuated the mist. He gave us a chance, Jackson said, reading the grief in her eyes. We can't waste it. They rode hard through the afternoon, following game trails and stream beds to mask their trail. The map they had seen in the glowing light had burned itself into Jackson's memory, a path west and then south, eventually leading to San Francisco, but by a route no conventional map would show. As dusk approached, they found the pass Grey Wolf had mentioned, a narrow gap between towering cliffs that would be all but invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. They made camp in a sheltered hollow just beyond the pass, too exhausted to continue in the failing light. After tending to the horses, Jackson built a small, smokeless fire. Elizabeth sat beside him, the carpet bag cradled in her lap, her face drawn with fatigue and concern. Do you think Grey Wolf? She began, unable to finish the question. Jackson placed his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. He knew what he was doing, he said gently. He gave us the greatest gift he could, a fighting chance. Elizabeth nodded, leaning into his embrace. After a moment, she reached into the carpet bag and withdrew the silver locket. This belongs to you, she said softly. It's time it returned to a Reeves. Jackson looked at the locket resting in her palm, the family crest gleaming in the firelight. The chain pooled like liquid silver. He could take it now, reclaim his family's legacy. It was what he had wanted since the moment he discovered it in her possession. Instead, he closed her fingers around it. "Keep it safe," he said, "at least until we reach San Francisco. Something tells me we still need its protection." "Are you sure?" Elizabeth asked, searching his face. Jackson nodded, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I've been chasing ghosts since the war ended, Elizabeth, running from memories, from pain." He touched his scar unconsciously. "But these past days with you, I've started to feel alive again, like maybe there's a future worth fighting for." Elizabeth's eyes shone in the firelight. "Or is that what you want? A future with me? I'm a scarred cowboy with nothing to offer but a loyal heart," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're a Boston lady with education and refinement. By all rights, we shouldn't make sense." "And yet," Elizabeth said, her hand rising to touch his scarred cheek, here we are," he agreed, covering her hand with his own. They sat in companionable silence as night settled fully around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the continued journey to San Francisco, the threat of Blackwood's pursuit, the mystery of the artifacts still to be unraveled. But tonight, in this moment of hard-won peace, they had found something neither had expected when fate first threw them together beside those lonely railroad tracks. Not just purpose, but the healing of broken soul. Jackson drew Elizabeth closer, and she rested her head against his shoulder. Above them, stars scattered across the vast desert sky, like the glowing symbols they had witnessed, a celestial map guiding them forward. Together,